Good evening. This is Tanya Creque with my final video installment. I will be sharing this evening my graduate project summary on nursing research. My project was to design, implement, and evaluate a college-level BSN class with an original lesson plan. The plan would include a minimum of 9 hours of teaching modalities. Those modalities were asynchronous and synchronous, such as lectures, handouts, content reviews, discussion questions, any modalities that were appropriate for the concept retention, including NCLEX-style test questions. The location for my preceptorship was at Norfolk State University in beautiful Norfolk, Virginia. This is a historically Black college or university founded in 1937. According to U.S. News and World Report Best Colleges ranking of 2019, Norfolk State University is one of the largest historically Black universities in the country, ranking in the top 25. The current enrollment is just under 4,700 students, with 50 students in their BSN program. This institution is now a 4-year co-ed state-supported liberal arts institution that offers 36 undergraduate, 15 master's, and 2 doctoral degree programs. My role as a nurse educator graduate student in Norfolk State University's BSN program was a traditional program, 22-month completion. As a nurse educator, I was charged with developing units of educational material in a subject of my preference to facilitate student learning and to broaden their understanding of the subject matter. According to dailynurse.com, nurse educators are vital to the growth and development of new nurses and new nurse educators. They're instrumental in preparing the next generation of nurses, shaping the profession for future and for holistic patient care and illness prevention. Under the mentorship of my preceptor, Mrs. Barnes, who is a certified nurse educator and registered nurse for over 30 years, I assisted in teaching a portion of her nursing research class this semester. Coupled with me joining them toward the end of their semester and working within the parameters of the university's learning objectives to be in compliance with their curriculum, we navigated the subject matter together. The title of the course was Nursing Research Dimensions. The course description, based upon the Norfolk State University syllabus, is to introduce the student to the research process and to provide a foundation for the utilization of research findings to drive decisions in the provision of nursing care. The course will examine the steps of the research process, guide the student to identify practice questions, review relevant literature, critique research findings, and apply evidence to promote patient safety and improve the quality of care. The background of my project, well, we know that research is an integral part of nearly everything we do as consumers. For example, we may not think about how or why acetaminophen is our go-to for a headache. We just reach for it because we know it works. However, the reason we do and the reason it works is because of a tried and true research efforts to affect outcomes. Research is important. We know that. And nursing research impacts health outcomes by changing or improving care practices. But how do we get there? Well, this is where it starts. Most BSN entry-level graduates do not have initial research responsibilities. As we can imagine, that makes sense. However, research contributes to a variety of skills and experiences to the science of nursing care, according to Tingen 2013. Many BSN programs only require 1 3-credit hour course for nursing research, which this is what this particular university requires. And I quote from Tingen, "Only with exposure and experience can students begin to understand the concept and importance of nursing research," end quote. Well, changes in evidence-based practices result from research directed toward improving outcomes, increasing quality of care, reducing costs, and phasing out ineffective practices, says Salinas. Salinas also says, as change agents, nurses and nursing students should embrace issues and practices that negatively impact outcomes and to be proactive advocates for improved patient care. As such, my project is very well needed and timely. The rationale of this Nursing Research Dimensions course is to introduce the student to the research process and provide a foundation for the student to become an informed consumer of research, to recognize opportunities to participate in the production of new knowledge through systematic scientific inquiry, and to advance patient care through the use of the best evidence to inform practice decisions. Again, that is from the syllabus from the course description of Norfolk State University. Now, my goals were to incorporate and achieve both my course learning outcomes according to ECPI's MSN program with the learning objectives of Norfolk State University through strategic learning methodologies while ensuring the student receive value through the learning strategies utilized. Now, nursing research is critical for nursing practice and necessary for advancements. We know that. We also know that changes in evidence-based practice again result from research directed toward improving those outcomes. So, when this MSN course was developed, course learning outcomes were established to ensure that learning occurred and concepts were understood and could be reproduced. It was my responsibility as the student educator in the MSN program to marry my project concept and its implementation with the goals and objectives I developed with the overall course learning outcomes of this program and the educational institution I aligned with, Norfolk State University. Through the implementation of these educational strategies and the techniques, and through this presentation, I will demonstrate how I have fulfilled those outcomes, which I feel best correlated with my project. So the course learning outcomes that I achieved, or were my goals to achieve at the time, were to integrate evidence-based nursing practice and related sciences for the continual improvement of nursing care to individuals, families, and communities. That students should act as a change agent by substantiating and applying research outcomes in practice or education settings to resolve nursing practice problems and to translate and disseminate resulting nursing knowledge. To implement current standards of practice and healthcare policies to design, deliver, manage, and evaluate culturally appropriate evidence-based education and nursing care for select populations. And then to demonstrate role development by performing in the role of nurse leader or nurse educator by integrating the concepts related to the area of practice, demonstrating expertise, evidence-based practice, and the appropriate competencies. And these course learning outcomes come directly from ECPI's syllabus for nursing course 695, Nursing Synthesis, which I am currently enrolled. So we decided that I would cover qualitative research design and qualitative sampling as well. So the objectives that I developed for the course of study were as follows: to discuss the rationale for qualitative research, to describe qualitative features, design features, to identify the major research traditions for qualitative research and to describe the domain of inquiry for each, to describe the main features and methods associated with ethnography, phenomenology, and grounded theory studies, and to describe key features of historical research, case studies, narrative analysis, and descriptive qualitative studies. I will say that these objectives were articulated and reinforced throughout the teaching sessions with the students to reinforce to them what they would achieve by the end of the sessions, and also for me to be able to measure their learning and their understanding. So, I'm not going to teach you my topic, but I will highlight some of the areas that I did cover in order to provide clarity of what I planned, what I implemented, and why. We know that qualitative research design is quite different from quantitative. In contrast, quantitative research design is developed prior to data collection and really is a stable process. The qualitative research design, on the other hand, emerges during the actual project. Oftentimes, the research actually unfolds as they work. That's called emergent, where things emerge, the information, the strategies and techniques emerge as the researcher is working with either the culture or with the people that they're studying about their data needs based upon what they have already learned. There are no variables, there are no controls, there is no blinding, which is typical of quantitative studies. Now, this is not to say that there's no planning beforehand. You don't just wake up one morning and say, I think I'm going to do a qualitative research study and I'm going to jump right out there. No. The data collection strategies and the potential equipment that may be needed have to be considered ahead of time. I mean, there is some planning to this, as well as, well, how would the researchers handle any consequences that may come up? The strategies introduced are based upon the data collected, and the insights, again, emerge as research is conducted. I feel like the students were able to grasp this concept more readily as I shared multiple examples during the lecture, and as some also use this approach in their own research proposals. They did have to come up with a research proposal, did literature review and the such as a part of the entire course. It was not a part of my objectives, but you'll see just here in a little bit that all of that really did tie in order to show me that the students learned what both myself and Ms. Barnes wanted them to learn. Now, this is a recreation of a chart depicting various qualitative research types, and I was inspired by a chart in Pollitt and Beck in 2018 in their text. We know that use of charts and graphs focuses the reader on pertinent information they need to remember, that they need to recall without being wordy. It's very easy to read a chart or a graph and to pull or extrapolate information that I may need to recall, as opposed to trying to read a whole lot of words and sift through the information. So, for example, we focused a lot on ethnography and phenomenology. As you can see here, ethnography describes and interprets culture and cultural behavior of a society, and it really is very labor intensive. The researcher actually becomes part of the culture in order to find out, whatever it is they're researching. Culture is the group's words, actions, rituals, and it guides the way people structure their experiences. Phenomenology, for example, focuses on the description and interpretation of people's lived experiences. It answers questions like, what is the essence of a phenomenon as is experienced by the people at this particular point in time? And what do those things mean? It acknowledges people's physical ties to their world. So again, the researchers become a part of the experiences that the individual is experiencing at the time. So, in creating my processes, I identified teaching and learning strategies that I felt like would stimulate engagement in the learning process, and it would also facilitate understanding of the detailed information that I was providing through the various ways that I utilize. The strategies I use conveyed the information to convey the information were many and varied, and are proven techniques with valid outcomes. First thing I did is I lectured. As you could see just now, I was speaking to the qualitative research designs in the research traditions. I lectured with a PowerPoint presentation. Now that supports both visual and auditory learners while providing an organized presentation of information according to Bradshaw and Hultquist. Now, many lecturers or many instructors or professors do lecture using PowerPoint. The thing that I think is important is that we're not reading off of the screen necessarily. And one of the things I like to do is be interactive. And so what I chose to do was to use research articles in order to depict the information that the definitions and the examples and the structure of the varied research designs that we were discussing. So research articles such as the ones you see here, there was an ethnographic research article as well as a phenomenological research article. And as I was lecturing, I gave the students some questions that they really had to critique. Research articles provide the opportunity to read and dissect the details, which enables critical analysis by Bradshaw and Hultquist. I asked specific questions related to the lecture content during the presentation to validate the students' understanding of the concepts and to also spark conversation. Now, this also meets the needs of the kinesthetic learner. They don't have to listen quite as hard. They actually have the article right in front of them, or had the article right in front of them, and they could refer back to it. Additional methodologies that I used were Kahoot. Kahoot is an interactive technology, an online web-based tool that is created by the creator, is shared with the students, and students learn through playing an interactive game. So, for example, they would take their cell phone, they would download the Kahoot app, which is, I think, Kahoot.io. IT. So they use their cell phone, they can use their iPad or any kind of tablet or a computer. They can use a laptop or a desktop. And so they log in, there's a code that they have to register so that they're playing the game that we're playing. So what I did is beforehand, I developed 50 questions in order to cover the extra information that myself and Mrs. Barnes had utilized because they were preparing for a test. So what I did was they would play the game, a question would pop up, they'd have like 30 seconds to answer the questions, and then they would log in on their phone, and whoever answered first correct, would kind of be the winner for that round. The kind of different twist that I used in my game is when they answered, they had to give me the rationale for the answer that was given. So you can utilize different techniques and different strategies. And that was something that I thought would be more than just they answered the question, they got it right or wrong, and we kept going. So this took about 2 hours in order to go over this test review. But it was okay because, the test that they took where I used this strategy, they actually did better on this test than they had done on the previous test. So that kind of made me feel good. Blending new technologies such as Kahoot with interactive classroom activities can result in improved learning, according to Missildine, 2013. And so I really wanted to engage the students in the learning process and not just sit and lecture to them. I wanted them to have the opportunity to really be a part of learning. I also utilized another strategy. I used Blackboard submission. Now, Blackboard is their learning management system. And so what I did is they were given additional assignments to critique articles using Blackboard, their learning management system. It enabled them to engage in a familiar process for information dissemination. So I actually divided the students into 2 groups, like you see here on the screen, and I gave one group one article to critique, and I gave another group a different article to critique. And there were 7 or 8 questions, different questions related to those articles that each group had to answer. And so one was a phenomenological article, and the other one was an ethnographic article. And so they had to submit that through Blackboard. So what we did is when we came back together as a class, we actually discussed, the one team, I asked questions, we reviewed, and then there was discussion with the other and vice versa. So even though they both had 2 different articles, we had a cross-pollination, if you will, a cross-discussion, so that both sides were actively engaged in the learning process. Group discussion was had, there was interaction, and actually I really think some good learning occurred as a result of it. Now, according to Stanley and Doherty, as students engage in cooperative and cognitive learning through peer interactions, the teacher assumes the role of facilitator in strategies such as discussion boards. Therefore, creating opportunities for sharing knowledge and information through classroom discussion, review of articles sparks exchange of ideas and encourages interactions among students and the facilitator. And I will tell you, this gave us great opportunity for discussion in the classroom. And it really kind of gave you an opportunity to see where students, these are young adult students, where their minds were, so to speak. Additionally, we discussed data collection in qualitative studies. So again, these were the objectives that I established: discuss the logic of sampling in qualitative study, identify and describing several types of sampling, identify and describe methods of collecting unstructured self-report data, and then again, critiquing qualitative research studies. So we did that using the techniques and strategies that I spoke of previously, but we know that the techniques and strategies and sampling and qualitative studies are different than they are or can be different than they are in quantitative studies. So sampling and qualitative studies are similar yet different. Researchers want participants who can provide good data for their study. Therefore, random selection in sampling is not required. Quality of samples are important, we know, regardless of study design. And we want to make sure that information-rich data sources are available. So for example, in certain qualitative studies, we're looking for key informants that are able to give us rich, deep sources of information that we would not necessarily be privy to if we didn't have that individual. The participants should be knowledgeable, articulate, reflective, and willing to talk at length, because the details do make the difference in qualitative research. According to Pollard and Beck, there are different types of sampling, and each type has their own purpose. For example, convenience sampling is basically like a volunteer sampling. It's economical, but it's not really preferred. Snowball sampling is where, for example, if I'm researching smokers, for example, which I'm not one of, but if I was researching smokers, I may solicit other people in my network that I know are smokers to be involved in a study. So that's called snowballing. I recruit other people that have similar characteristics. Purposive sampling is where researchers deliberately choose participants who will best contribute to the study and meet a specific profile that they have pre-established. And then theoretical sampling involves decisions about where to best find the data to develop an emerging theory. Again, that emergent component. So our discussions in the classroom specifically included their interpretations of the students' interpretations of these study types and how they may approach soliciting participants for each sample type. So in other words, we had a discussion. We talked about each one of the sampling type. We actually talked about more than these. And I asked them to explain to me, give me an example of each of the different types of sampling. So one student came up with an experience where there was a survey being conducted on campus, and as students entered the exited the student center, they were asked to participate by completing a specific survey. Now, this would be an example of a convenient sampling because the researchers actually used the population that was most convenient at the time to recruit the most participants. I felt through this discussion process that we had at this particular point in the lecture that using real life examples, the concept started to become real for the students and learning resulted. So they really did walk away with information, not just information, but understanding. Now, as qualitative studies are different in most aspects from quantitative studies, I share these two research types with their different sampling styles to further depict the differences and similarities between these two research types. These types are basically quote unquote experience driven. They require input of the few or the many. So, for example, with ethnography, you can see that conversations typically are had with between 25 and 50 informants, that multiple interviews occur with a smaller number of key informants. However, they're looking at sampling things as well as people. So there are artifacts there, and those artifacts are culturally driven. This particular artifact is just a picture that I got from dreamstime.com. However, the information must come from those who have experienced what is being studied, or from relics and artifacts as I depicted here that provide significant information about the culture, traditions, or happenings. Now, in phenomenological studies, the samples are typically very small. In contrast to ethnography, 25 to 50, in phenomenology, they're often 10 or less. All participants, again, must have experienced whatever the phenomenon is that the researcher is studying at the time, and they must be able to articulate what it's like to have lived that experience. So they may require an interpreter. It can't be someone that is nonverbal, for example, because then the researcher would not be able to get that information from that individual. So the image here that you see is a relic, and this is an image of an antique medicinal liquor prescription form during the Prohibition era. So I just wanted to give a couple of samples of the types of things that researchers may look for, and that particular image came off of ebay.com. In evaluating my project, let me first say that I had a great time. Like anything else, I think going into a classroom where you're not known, where people don't know who you are, they don't know what to expect. It was a little daunting at first, even for someone like myself that, I feel at home and even in crowds oftentimes. But what I did after the lecture is I provided, excuse me, I developed an evaluation tool to measure the outcomes of my lecture. And I thought that was important so that I would get feedback of how the participants, the students, felt about the information, my delivery. So the post-lecture evaluation was divided into 3 sections. Section 1 was about the student. Section 2 was the evaluation of the content, and then Section 3 was evaluation of the presenter. Some of the areas were a Likert type scale that asked strongly agree, agree, neutrals, disagree, strongly disagree, and others required narrative responses. The collective feedback provided details on each from the 17 participants in the class. Overall, the students rated that the objectives were clear, that the assignments supported the objectives. The strengths of the lecture they felt were that the lecture was very interactive, that it was an engaging presentation, that good examples were provided, and the instructor or lecturer was knowledgeable. One student commented as a weakness that the lecturer read from the slides. So the tool that I utilized will be in the download. So now in order to evaluate, what I did is I looked at the outcomes that I established in the beginning. And I'll say that the students initially and throughout the course objected to the thought of nursing research. Oh, they grumbled and they fussed and they complained. And they kept saying research is not exciting. And actually, on one of my evaluations, one of the students actually did write that nursing research is boring. But we know that it's not exciting or interesting for most people. However, for those individuals that really embrace it, it can become interesting. By the end of the semester, however, it was evident that the transfer of knowledge had occurred and each student had actually begun to develop the primary skills necessary to become a novice nurse researcher. Specifically, I feel like they came to understand how qualitative studies can provide insights into patients' healthcare experiences and how nurses use those insights to adjust care delivery. So, in looking at the four, you'll see the four outcomes there. You'll see that each one has a check mark because I do believe that the students did learn to do each of these things. According to McDonald, outcomes to be achieved should be developed prior to instruction. So those objectives or outcomes were established and they will be used as an evaluation or determinant of learning. As such, I did create the objectives for each lecture session or assignment as a measure of formative evaluation, and the test questions were used as a summative evaluation. Each have been a factor in my overall assessment of the success of the learning strategies that were utilized. I feel like the students engaged in the necessary steps required to plan and implement a research study as evidenced by their topic selection, their literature review, their proposal development, and presentation of the proposal at the end of their course. Although these assignments were not part of my overall plan, they were course objectives developed by the institution's faculty, which is evidence of their transition from students naive to the research process to novice researchers. In addition, some students did develop a qualitative research plan. Not all of the research proposals were quantitative. A few were qualitative, using some of the information they acquired from my teaching strategies. Specifically, as evidenced by their literature reviews for their research proposals, students have gained a primary understanding of how and why evidence-based nursing practice leads to overall improved outcomes. As change agents, nurses often seek out issues in practice that require direction, that require change or improvement. I believe the students demonstrated the importance of being that change agent, as evidenced by their research proposal presentations and subsequent follow-up questions posed by myself, by their peers, and by Mrs. Barnes. I believe I met the nurse educator role required to meet the program outcomes by delivering the selected nursing research content and documented strategies outlined in this project supported by research. I also believe I was successful in providing current standards of educational techniques by seizing the opportunity to empower students with knowledge of how research impacts how we practice, the care we provide, and how we measure outcomes based upon their level of knowledge and education. In summary, research in nursing is pivotal to continued improvements in nursing care through evidence-based practice. However, many nurses do not embrace research because they've not been exposed to the significance of the improvements that they affect. My goals were to empower nursing students with the knowledge of research that will increase their understanding of the concepts and pique their interest for learning more or embracing these concepts. So my project was to enlighten, inform, and empower BSN students on the significance of research in nursing. I believe I did that. I utilized varied learning strategies to disseminate multiple levels of information using all learning styles to ensure every student's needs were met. Students engaged in group discussions, Kahoot review, and article critiques to validate primary knowledge and understanding of the material. Students also demonstrated through their research study proposal their understanding of how research can impact evidence-based care delivery and patient outcomes. Overall, I believe the goals of this project were definitely met. And now, thank you for your attention and my references.